When my boss introduced me to his wife, I expected polite small talk. But the moment she leaned in with a teasing smile and asked, "Do you always make women forget their manners?" I knew nothing about that night would be ordinary. I never expected to stand out that night. It was one of those company dinners where I was easily the youngest in the room, a room filled with men in suits whose laughter carried the weight of decades of connections, and women whose elegance seemed untouchable. I remember adjusting my tie for the 10th time, wishing I could sink into the background. And then, she entered. My boss's wife. Her presence shifted the air instantly, like the sudden hush that follows when music softens. She wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't need to be. Grace clung to her like a second skin, her black hair swept neatly over one shoulder, her cream-colored dress flowing effortlessly as though it had been made for the evening light. When my boss introduced me, I fumbled through a polite smile. She met my gaze with eyes that seemed amused before I'd even spoken. The kind of look that told me she had already measured me, already found something worth watching. We all took our places around the table. The chandelier above cast a warm golden light that made the wine glasses glitter like tiny stars. I tried to focus on conversation, to keep pace with the polished remarks of the others. But then I made the mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. She was speaking, recounting some memory with the kind of composure only years of experience could polish, and without realizing it, I cut in, an eager comment slipping past my lips before she had finished. The table fell quiet for the briefest second. My face burned. I stammered, searching for a way to recover. That was when she leaned slightly toward me, her perfume brushing against my nerves like a whisper, and said, in a voice low enough for only me to hear, "Do you always make women forget their manners?" The words weren't cruel. They were laced with playful challenge, her lips curving into a smile that made my heart stumble. A teasing remark, delivered with such quiet confidence that I didn't know whether to apologize, laugh, or stare. I managed something clumsy in reply. I don't even remember what. What I do remember was the way her eyes lingered on mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. And in that small, stolen second, it felt as though the world had drawn a circle around us, separating us from the noise of clinking glasses and polite laughter. Later, as she passed me the wine bottle, her fingertips brushed mine. A spark so subtle, so quick, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But the faint smile that tugged at her lips told me she had felt it too. I came to that dinner expecting to be invisible. Instead, I left with her voice echoing in my head, a question wrapped in teasing charm, one I couldn't stop turning over. Do you always make women forget their manners? And though I didn't know it then, that single moment would change everything. The dinner carried on long after that moment, but I barely tasted the food. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded when others spoke, but my attention kept drifting back to her. Every time she laughed, every time her hand reached for a glass or adjusted her necklace, it was like some invisible thread tugged at me. Eventually, the crowd thinned. Executives left with handshakes and practiced goodbyes, and even my boss disappeared to take a late phone call. That was when I found myself wandering toward the kitchen, searching for a quiet corner to breathe. The soft clink of porcelain met me first, followed by the low hum of a woman's voice. She was there, standing by the counter, pouring steaming water into delicate china cups. The glow of the under-cabinet lights cast her face in a gentler shade than I had seen at the table. She noticed me immediately, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "Looking for refuge?" she asked, her tone warm, teasing. I laughed, awkward but honest. "Maybe just a little." She gestured toward the kettle. "Then you're in luck. Tea makes everything easier." I should have excused myself, thanked her politely and left. But something in her manner disarmed me. She wasn't the boss's wife. Here, not in this quiet kitchen away from the formality of dinner. She was just a woman, pouring tea, offering me a chance to sit. She handed me a cup, and for a second, our fingers touched again. The contact was brief, but her skin was cool, the porcelain warm, and the contrast made me catch my breath. She noticed. I could see it in the small flicker of her eyes, the faintest tilt of her head. We sat at the small breakfast table near the window. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass, each drop steady and calming. The storm had been gathering all night, and now it whispered through the darkness while the house remained hushed. We started with small talk, safe topics. Work. Travel. Music. But her answers carried little sighs of honesty beneath them. She confessed she missed the simplicity of being herself, without always being introduced as his wife. Her voice softened on those words, as though they carried a weight she was tired of holding. I listened. Really listened. And when I offered a few words, she looked at me differently, as if surprised that someone so much younger cared enough to notice the difference between the polished mask and the woman behind it. Her laugh came easier now, low and unguarded, filling the room with something that felt private. She leaned slightly closer across the table, the steam from her cup curling between us like a veil. In that moment, I realized something dangerous. I wasn't just curious about her anymore. I wanted to understand her, to know the parts of her no one else seemed to see. And as her fingertips brushed mine again when she reached for the sugar bowl, I knew I wouldn't forget this quiet, stolen conversation. A week later, I saw her again. It was another gathering, this time less formal, an evening of drinks and laughter at one of the company's weekend retreats. The air smelled of grilled food and bonfire smoke, a little less polished than the dinner party, but no less intimidating for me. I tried to blend in, keeping to the edges of conversation. And yet, when I walked into the main lounge, she looked up almost instantly. Her eyes found me as if she had been waiting. There were plenty of seats open, large armchairs, sofas, bar stools lined neatly near the counter. But when I sat down, she crossed the room deliberately and took the empty space beside me. Her perfume arrived before she did, something floral and subtle that made the air feel warmer. "Do you always sit alone?" she asked, her tone playful but edged with curiosity. I shrugged, smiling. "Only until someone braver joins me." Her laugh was soft, genuine, like she wasn't just amused but pleased. She tilted slightly toward me as though the crowd around us had vanished. The conversations in the room swelled and faded, but ours carried on as if we were tucked away in a private corner. We spoke about books, about places we wanted to see, about the strange quirks of people we both knew. With each exchange, the air between us tightened, becoming something quieter, sharper. At one point, someone across the room called her name. She turned her head to respond, and in that small movement, her silk sleeve brushed against my arm. The fabric was light, but the sensation stayed long after. She didn't move away. Neither did I. Then, under the table, her knee grazed mine. At first I thought it was accidental, the kind of bump that happens when seats are close. But when the moment lingered, when neither of us shifted back, I realized it was something else entirely. She carried on speaking, her voice steady, her smile poised, but her stillness was deliberate. Her hand rested on the table near mine, so close I could see the faint shimmer of her wedding band, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. And then she leaned in, not too far, not enough for anyone else to notice, but close enough that I felt her breath against my ear as she whispered a quick remark about the man telling jokes across the room. Her words barely registered. What stayed with me was the way her voice lowered just for me, the way her shoulder brushed against mine, the way the world seemed to contract until it was only her and me in that crowded lounge. I knew then that whatever line had existed between us was shifting. Not erased, not crossed outright, but blurred, drawn faintly in the dim light, daring us both to pretend we couldn't see it. The retreat ended late, with people drifting out in twos and threes. I hadn't driven, and by the time I stepped outside, most of the rides were gone. The night was cool, the air heavy with the smell of damp grass after a light rain. I stood near the curb, debating whether to call a cab, when I heard her voice. "Need a ride?" She was leaning against her car, arms folded, watching me with that same half-smile I was beginning to recognize, the one that made me feel as if she already knew what I was thinking. I hesitated, but only for a second. "If it's not trouble." "Not at all," she said, unlocking the car with a smooth flick of her wrist. The drive was quiet at first. The hum of the engine filled the space between us, the dashboard lights glowing softly across her face. I stole glances when I thought she wouldn't notice. The curve of her cheek, the relaxed way she held the wheel, the small crease in her brow as she focused on the road. When we reached my street, she slowed but didn't stop right away. Instead, she pulled up in front of my apartment building and left the car idling. For a moment neither of us moved. The silence felt charged, full of words neither of us dared to say. She finally broke it. "Do you realize," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the steering wheel, "the position you put me in?" Her voice wasn't accusing. It was softer, more vulnerable, as though she was asking herself as much as me. I swallowed. "I don't mean to make things complicated." My voice sounded rough, uncertain. "But I can't pretend I don't feel something." She turned her head then, her eyes searching mine. In that dim light, I could see the conflict etched across her face, amusement, longing, restraint, all tangled together. "You're too young to understand what this could mean," she whispered, almost to herself. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I understood more than she thought. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I let the truth slip out, simple and bare. "I don't want to make your life harder. I just can't seem to stay away from you." Her hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale against the leather. She didn't answer right away. The streetlight outside flickered, casting shadows across the car interior. Her profile looked both strong and fragile in that shifting glow. Finally, she exhaled, a shaky breath that told me she was holding back more than she said. "You have no idea how dangerous that is to hear." For a heartbeat, her hand hovered, as if she might reach for mine. But then she clenched it back into her lap, grounding herself. The engine's steady hum was the only sound as she put the car in gear again. I opened the door, but before stepping out, I looked at her one last time. Her eyes met mine, unblinking, and in them I saw it, the same pull I felt, the same battle she was fighting to keep hidden. I closed the door gently, but my heart stayed in that car with her. The next time I saw her, it was at another company event, one of those long evenings that dragged on with speeches, laughter, and too much wine. By the time night settled in, the air inside the hall felt thick, heavy with the warmth of too many people and the scent of food and drink. I tried to keep to myself, mingling only when I had to, but I always knew where she was. Even when I wasn't looking, I felt her presence, the subtle awareness that kept my chest tight, like a string tied between us. And then it happened. The lights flickered. Once, twice, and then, suddenly, darkness. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a few nervous laughs, the sound of chairs scraping. Within moments, candles were lit, their flames dancing uncertainly on the tables. The room shifted from bright and modern to something far more intimate, almost secretive. That was when I realized she was standing close. Too close. In the dim candlelight, her face was softer, her features touched with a golden glow. I stepped back without thinking and nearly bumped into a side table. She reached out quickly, her hand pressing firmly against my chest to steady me. It was nothing, really. A simple reflex. But the feel of her palm through the thin fabric of my shirt, the warmth, the gentleness, the way her fingers lingered just a heartbeat longer than necessary, it stopped time. I didn't move. Couldn't. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time, she didn't mask what she felt. The silence between us was thick, humming with something we both tried to ignore. In the flicker of candlelight, her gaze searched mine, not playful now, not teasing, but open. Vulnerable. Wanting. My heart pounded so hard I was certain she could feel it beneath her hand. I wanted to cover her fingers with mine, to hold them there, to let her know I didn't want the moment to end. But she was the one who pulled back first. Slowly, carefully, as though detaching herself from something dangerous. She glanced away, her breath a little unsteady, before smoothing the silk of her dress as if nothing had happened. Around us, the room was alive again, people laughing at the outage, clinking glasses, pretending the power failure was just another story to tell later. But for me, the world had narrowed to the warmth still lingering on my chest where her hand had been. She didn't look at me again that evening, not directly. Yet every time I caught her in my peripheral vision, I saw the same truth I was carrying, that something between us had shifted. We had crossed no lines. And yet, in that fragile, flickering light, one had almost been crossed. And I knew from that moment forward, nothing would feel the same again. The company hosted a small garden gathering a week later, meant to be casual, an easy evening under the stars. String lights hung between the trees, their glow warm against the deepening dusk. Music drifted faintly from inside the house, a gentle backdrop to the quiet conversations scattered across the lawn. I lingered near the edge of the crowd, half listening to a group of colleagues, when I felt that familiar pull, the awareness of her. And there she was, stepping out of the house and into the night air, her dress moving with the breeze, her eyes scanning the crowd before finally settling on me. It wasn't deliberate, not in any obvious way. But she walked toward the far edge of the garden, near the low stone wall, and something in the tilt of her head, the pause of her steps, told me I was meant to follow. I did. The voices behind us blurred into background noise as I joined her by the railing. Beyond it stretched the garden, quiet and glowing with the soft shimmer of fireflies. The cool air carried the faint scent of jasmine, wrapping around us like something alive. For a long moment, we stood in silence. She rested her hands on the stone edge, staring out into the dark, her profile lit by the golden strings of light. Her expression was thoughtful, almost wistful. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely louder than the rustle of leaves. I can't remember the last time I felt this, awake. I turned to look at her, but she kept her gaze fixed on the night sky. Her words weren't meant to be answered, they were a confession, one that seemed to weigh on her even as it lifted something from her shoulders. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice not to betray everything I was feeling. Instead, I did the only thing that felt right in that moment. Slowly, carefully, I reached for her hand. Her fingers were cool at first, delicate against mine. For a heartbeat, she didn't move, and I feared I had gone too far. But then, almost imperceptibly, her hand tightened around mine. Her thumb brushed across my knuckles, a soft, deliberate motion that made my chest ache with both relief and longing. Neither of us looked at the other. We didn't need to. The silence between us said enough, more than words could have managed. Her breathing shifted, slower now, deeper, as though simply holding my hand steadied something inside her. I wanted to tell her how much this meant to me, how much she had come to matter. But the quiet was too perfect, too fragile. Speaking would have broken it. So we stayed there, side by side, our hands joined, the night air cool around us and the fireflies glowing like scattered stars at our feet. And in that silence I understood, it wasn't only me caught in this. She felt it too. The days after the garden gathering felt different. I carried the memory of her hand in mine everywhere, the way her thumb had traced my knuckles, the warmth of her skin, the quiet confession in her silence. It wasn't something I could forget. But I also knew we were standing on dangerous ground. When she asked to meet me a few afternoons later, my heart raced. It wasn't at a party, not at a dinner, not in the safe disguise of a crowd. It was just the two of us, in a small cafe tucked away from the city's noise. She arrived in simple clothes, her hair tied back, her presence quieter than usual. But even without the polished elegance she wore at her husband's side, she carried that same natural grace that made it impossible to look away. We sat across from each other, steam curling from untouched cups of coffee. For a while neither of us spoke. The weight of everything unsaid hovered between us. Finally, she broke the silence. "You've reminded me," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the table, "that I'm still a woman. Not just someone's wife. Not just a name on an invitation list." Her words were steady, but her hands betrayed her. She turned the coffee cup slowly in her palms, the smallest tremor running through her fingers. I leaned forward, my voice low. "You don't have to explain." She looked up then, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "But I do. Because you deserve honesty." She took a breath, steadying herself. "What I feel when I'm around you, it's real. more real than I've allowed myself to admit. But I made vows I can't undo, and I won't pretend I can give you more than this moment. The words cut, even though I had expected them. A part of me had hoped, foolishly, that she would say something different. But the other part, the part that cared for her deeply, knew this was the only ending that made sense. Before I could respond, she reached across the table. Her hand cupped my face gently, her thumb brushing my cheek in a gesture so tender it silenced me. Her touch held more honesty than her words ever could. "You've changed something in me," she whispered. "And I'll never forget that." She leaned forward and pressed her lips softly against my cheek. Not rushed, not casual, but lingering, warm, filled with meaning. I closed my eyes, memorizing the moment, the way her breath felt against my skin, the faint tremble in her hand as she held me. When she pulled away, her eyes glistened, though her smile remained. She stood, smoothing her jacket as though preparing herself to step back into the world she belonged to. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. As I watched her walk away, sunlight streaming through the cafe window caught in her hair, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. It wasn't the ending I had once wanted. But it was honest. And in its own way, it was enough.